a legal justification for the taking of indigenous peoples' lands. The Pope and other Christian European nations in the say the late 15th century described or defined indigenous peoples as being non-Christian. Non-Christian peoples did not have legal rights or economic or land-based rights. And so the doctrine of discovery was created to kind of justify the theft of indigenous peoples' lands. The discovery doctrine is not only kind of applicable to, say, the United States or Canada, but it's also been applied legally in places like Australia and in New Zealand. And so in the 16th and 17th and even in the 18th centuries, it becomes a way for European countries to kind of justify their explorations and their claims onto lands across the world. So since the 1820s, it's been part of kind of the legal precedent which the Supreme Court uses to justify or to make decisions in court cases. And I think then interestingly, courts in, say, New Zealand have used the so-called Marshall decision and those decisions as legal justification or legal precedent in their cases involving indigenous peoples' lands too. So it's not just, again, kind of a US case, it actually also affects indigenous peoples across the world. It was, so on one hand, I think it's a positive development, right? Kind of recognizing kind of the Vatican's role in the long history of the theft of indigenous peoples' lands, the roles of and the process of genocide and the violent theft of indigenous peoples' lands in the United States, and what is now the modern day United States, Canada, Central and South America, Australia, New Zealand, right? So I think that is a positive, that's a positive development. But it doesn't maybe go far enough as indigenous activists would like, right? So it's not rescinding it, it's not withdrawing kind of that legal, it almost kind of more functions as an apology. So there's kind of a limits there on what has actually been done. And I think, well, secondly, it doesn't return land, right? Right? I mean, so that indigenous, that it's not anything that is kind of returning indigenous land to indigenous peoples. Well, I think in a couple of ways, right? So it becomes kind of legal precedent in the United States. And so that when the Supreme Court begins to decide decisions that affect indigenous peoples, it's still rooted in the discovery doctrine. And so one of the lasting impacts on it today is that it's still part of the kind of the legal mechanisms that exist in North America. I think secondly, right, it is part of the long process by which indigenous peoples have had their lands taken from them through force, through negotiations or whatever but it is kind of embedded in that kind of long process of theft and the taking of indigenous peoples' lands. For example, when Spanish explorers would come into, say, what is now modern day New Mexico, Arizona, or even California a little later, they had to have Catholic priests accompanying them. Right. So yeah, and so even in, say, the American Southwest, the principal institutions of colonialism, right, the mission system, were operated by Catholic priests, and so definitely kind of the Catholic Church was deeply embedded in the kind of the systems of colonization that we see in North America.